Parents, what spooky past life memory did your kid utter? When my son was 3, he told his mom that he was a cosmonaut the last time he was a grown up. Not an astro_naut, the Russian version. We are 99% certain he hadn't heard the word before. When my daughter was 3 and starting to talk, Clearer was talking to someone, and concerned I walked into the bedroom and no one was there. Initially I thought it was her playing with her toys. Days later the same scenario, but this time I asked who she was talking to, and she replied, your grandma. I thought she meant my mom who had recently passed, so I showed a pic of her and asked, is this her? No, your grandma, was a reply. I found a picture of my grandma and she with a big smile said yes, her. I was shocked, since I don't have pictures of my grandma displayed, and she dies 1991 and my daughter born 2015. When I was about 4, my family and I were moving house. We went to view this house in a rural village that was right by an airfield that had been very important during WW2, and there were still disused Anderson shelters in the garden and fields behind. Apparently the minute I saw them, I ran to my mum, clung to her arm, and asked, are there going to be more bombs, and got really agitated. Nobody ever spoke about the war. This was in the 90s, and we didn't even have a TV. My mum was really spooked by the whole thing. Not exactly the same thing, but my 5-year-old daughter has been saying things like, when I look in mirrors there are a lot of people in here, and why were so many people in my room last night? For like 2 years. My daughter talks about her grandson all the time. I thought it was just an imaginary friend, but then a couple nights ago she came out of her room at bedtime absolutely sobbing, and said, I'm sad, because I miss my grandson. He lives in my old house in my old neighborhood. She has never lived anywhere other than this apartment. Edit. Totally thought this would get buried. To answer some questions we have asked her about him, but it's pretty hit or miss on whether she'll actually answer or just think it's a fun game. The other night after some questions she told us that he sleeps in a crib and has a white tongue, but when I asked her his name a few hours ago she said Guga and laughed. It totally could be just her imagination, but she also told me some weird things about the baby I lost a few months ago, which really makes me wonder if she remembers/knows things we don't. In 2006 my best friend Nick was Kaya in Iraq. We used to wrestle/fight until one of us submitted. These sessions would start randomly and always be initiated by showing your fangs. This involved pointing your pointer and middle finger down in front of your mouth while growling at the other person. A couple of weeks after his death some family from the other side of the country that we only see every 5 years or so was visiting. My cousin's son, who was about 5 and who I never met prior to this visit, comes over. He gives me the fangs and smiles. I asked him, where did you learn that? He says, your friend says hi, and runs away. I went to my room and cried for a bit. Not me, but a friend's little sister. The whole family was out for dinner at a restaurant in a skiing village, which they recently bought a cottage near. My friend's little sister, as soon as they walked in, said, I know this place. My mother and I used to paint here. To which her mother replied, we've never been here before. What do you mean? She replied with no. My mother from before. We used to paint here all the time. The family was obviously a little freaked out, but didn't think much of it as she was pretty young, and they figured just messing around. Later on though, when talking to the waitress, the little girl again adamantly mentioned how she used to paint there, and the waitress revealed that it in fact was an art studio for many years in the 1900s, but had been converted sometime in the early 2000s into a restaurant. Needless to say, the entire table, waitress included, got goosebumps and were at a loss for words. Obligatory, not the parent, but the kid here. Apparently used to have rather frequent bouts of nightmares back when I was 4. And it always began with me screaming the name Sarah, then calling for help loudly, which would wake pretty much everyone in the house up, and ending with me just blubbering out, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, over and over and over again, all the while crying and sobbing. When I would wake up in the morning, I'd have no recollection about any of this. My parents had no idea what caused it, given that they knew no one named Sarah that I had interacted with. We had no TV or anything of the sort. I hadn't begun going to preschool yet, and didn't know how to read beyond a few simple words. Nothing they did seemed able to stop it either. The whole thing went on for a good long while, almost a year, until one day, it just sort of stopped. Mom apparently tried asking me once about it, and kid me said something to the effect of, "Sarah doesn't want to see me crying anymore, so I won't." Didn't actually know any of this happened until some years back, when I got to talking to my parents about how I always found the name Sarah to be beautiful. I don't know how old I was, but when I was young, 6, I was in the car with my parents, and I said something like, "Oh, I used to live there," while pointing at a house we were driving past. Turns out it was my great-great-grandmother's house. My grandma has a story from when my dad was 2 to 3 years old. He told her once that he was almost born before, but was too sick and died and had to come back later. Turns out my grandma had at least one miscarriage before he was born that was likely due to birth defects caused by a medication she had been taking at the time. Well, I'm not a parent, but I once told my mother, "I used to be your dad," when I was a toddler. And if that's not weird enough, he died about 9 months before I was born. One of my preschool students, "What do you want to do when you're a kid again?" Me, "Well, grown-ups don't become kids again. We grow up and stay grown-ups." Well, I remember when I was a grown-up and I drove a car, and now I'm a kid again. Age 2 or 3, my daughter told us about when she and her other parents had to run away from their burning house, but not just their house. Everything around them was on fire. They didn't escape. She also told us how warm and cozy it was in her mother's womb. My daughter is deathly afraid of fire because the fire at school killed my sister, and my other mom was really sad. When she started preschool at 3, they had a fire drill and she cried hysterically until it was over, and she was convinced there was no fire. I had to go pick her up, and on the way home she told me she's glad they have fire drills so all of the kids don't die like at her last school. I'm still freaked out. My younger sister, when she was 3, started talking to my mom about when I was a big girl and you were a little girl. She said she went to my parents' wedding. She described her old self physically, and my mom says that sounded like my mom's grandmother Grace. My sister also talked about the greenhouse she used to live in at the end of a dirt road and the fact that her mother, my mom's great-grandmother Matilda, died from a snake bite while they lived there. She described the snake as pretty, and with the full description my mom thinks she was describing a copperhead. Now, we lived in northern Nebraska, no copperheads, and Matilda died in southeast Oklahoma, Copperhead region. My sister said she killed the snake with a hoe. These discussions always took place at bedtime. One day, we were putting in the garden and my dad was sitting down and sharpening the hoe with a file, and my sister told him he was doing it wrong. He told her to show him how to do it. She put her hands on his and placed them in the correct position, and later he said that she was right. He was doing it wrong. For those of you interested in timelines, this would be in 1980. My mother's grandmother Grace died in 1968, and her great-grandmother Matilda died in 1902. Also, we don't know if snakebite was the cause of death for her great-grandmother Matilda. I was 15 at the time these little nightly discussions were going on, so I remember them fairly well. She probably told these things on and off for about 6 months, and by 4 she would say, "I'm tired of talking about it." I'm not a great writer, so I hope this is not too confusing. When he was around 4, my grandson used to talk about his job at the ice factory. One day he was talking about his boss Favo and the day he quit. I asked him why he quit, and he turned to me and quite passionately said, "I'll tell you why I quit. They made me work 15 days in a row without a break, and I had enough of that." It was weird hearing all that righteous anger coming out of that little boy. My daughter just informed me that he was 3 when he always talked about working at the ice factory. So yeah, scary 3-year-olds. When he was 3, my husband decided to treat our son to a flight over our city in a Cessna. When it was time to get on the plane, our boy climbed into the pilot's seat and was extremely upset when he was told he had to move. He began crying and saying he was sorry. He didn't mean to crash that plane last time, and he said he'd be good this time. My husband managed to calm him by pointing out that his legs were too short for his feet to reach the pedals. Once he got settled in the back seat, he started fussing about not being able to use the radio, so the pilot got him a headset, just didn't plug it in all the way. Our son then started trying to raise the tower, so he could to his radio check and get clearance. At that point the pilot needed to take a break. He went for a smoke while my husband talked to our son, who told him that he crashed the last plane he flew and a lot of people died. When the pilot got back, they were able to do the flight with no further issues. About a year later, we went to an aeronautics museum when an old mosquito was being restored. Our son told the curator that he used to fly one of those, so he offered us a tour of the plane. When we got in, our son pointed out several things that were "wrong" with the plane, which turned out to be correct. Things like the joystick being the wrong sort, etc. The curator told us the plane had previously been modernized and was now being restored to original condition. He also confirmed that the items our son had pointed out were in fact slated to be replaced. Our kid is grown now and doesn't remember ever being a pilot before and has absolute zero interest in planes, but he does remember just knowing things about airplanes and piloting them. Apparently when I was really little, around 3 or so, I told my mom that this was my last time here, that I wasn't going to come back. I had a brother pass away from brain cancer. At the time we had a cat who was a calico and just sort of knew he was battling something. She was really mean to most people, but with him she was gentle. He would grab her paws and she would just let it happen. Well, about 3 years after he passed, my parents had another child, another boy. He was about 3 when he told my parents about the white, brown, and black cat that used to let him grab her paws. She had died about a year before he was born. Mine said that he had a dream he was in heaven or some other place before he was born, with lots of men in suits who had lined up every woman on the planet, and the suits told him to pick who would be his mum. The part that creeped me out is I remember my mum telling me I had a dream exactly like that as a child. From a message my ex sent me last year about our daughter who was 3 at the time. On hearing a motorbike I had one before I was little, it went whoosh, and then I had no legs and mummy and daddy had to help me, but I didn't want to, so I went to sleep, and now I'm too little. My 5-year-old boy has a lot of creepy past life utterings, but the most concerning was when he told me he was going to be replaced soon by a brown girl with long hair. This comment section taught me something: never lower your guard around 3-year-olds. We named our son after my father, who passed away 3 years before he was born. My father pumped gas at a local gas station for years. My son saw one of the oil trucks drive by one day and proceeded to talk about how he was pumping gas at the gas station. It weirded me right out cause we never talked about that before. He's only 3 years old. I was driving my family across the state to visit family. Some commercial on the radio about Vegas came on, and I started singing Viva Las Vegas in my best Elvis impersonation. My son was about 3 to 4, and he says I don't like Vegas. I lost my life and a lot of money there. His mom and I glanced at each other like WTF. He never said anything else about it. When my brother was about 3 back in the 90s, our family was sitting down for dinner and he randomly said, "Dad, remember when I lived in Spain? We are from the UK." And my dad, humoring him, said, "Yeah." And he continued that he lived in Spain before with his other family, but he died when he was on a fishing trip with his dad, and the last thing he remembers is his dad's hand trying to reach him as he drowned. He also reeled off some Spanish names for his parents, which there was no way he would have known those kind of names, and he started to sort of meditate in his room from time to time. He eventually stopped talking about it as he got a little older and doesn't remember anything about it anymore. Crazy to hear so many other people have similar experiences. My little brother, when he was little, like 3 or 4, said that he was in the jungle saving animals, and one day he had to decide if he would stay with the animals or come live with us. He chose us, but reminded my mom that he couldn't stay forever, just for a little while. He passed this last January at 26 years old. Edit. I appreciate the love. Everyone make sure to say what you need to those who need to hear it. I don't believe it's my place to tell the whole story, and I don't believe this is the forum, so I'll leave this as is. I also want to advocate for professional mental health for those who have experienced the loss of a child, sibling, parent, etc. Don't figure it all out alone. Go get help. Now I'm scared to talk to my 3 years old. My daughter would refer to me as her new mommy. Then, as her vocabulary increased, she said, "You're my new mommy, but it's okay, I like you." Then one day, "You're my new mommy. I had 2 brothers, but they all died, but it's okay BC, I like you." She never mentioned her real family again. Last time she did, she was about 3 or 4 years old. My mom said, when I was pretty young, she was driving me to daycare before work, and I told her, "You should have called Ima last night before she died." This was an old coworker she loved. Turns out Ima had died that night. Apparently when I was a kid, my dad and I were watching Serverman. Apparently it was an episode where he was in the woods, and I said something along the lines of, "I got lost in the woods once with friends, but I was never found." Not so much past life. When my son was about 4, we were driving to daycare. He randomly pipes and says, "Mommy, I had this dream where you were pregnant." We named the baby Dawson, but then he fell off the bed and died. He wouldn't give me any more information than that. I was super weirded out. That evening I decided to get a couple pregnancy tests, and sure enough I was pregnant. Went through the next day and never mentioned anything to anyone, but the following day I woke up with cramps. Ended up going to the hospital and found out I'd miscarried. Still never said anything to anyone about it. A few days go by and we are driving to daycare and my son says, "Remember that dream I had about the baby? That's silly because you're not pregnant." I was absolutely floored. It was so weird. My son was 3 at the time. At bedtime he said, "Mama, one time the bad guys got me and drove me in their car." And I said, "What?" And he continued to tell me a story about being locked in a room and he was hungry and I didn't find him. The bad guys got away and he never got out. That shit scared me so much I still get freaked by it. I held him so right that night. I was at a nature show with my daughter, the kind where they bring animals out and tell the audience about them. This particular show was about wolves, and the handler was telling the audience why she did what she did with the wolves. My daughter, maybe 4 at the time, said I used to do that. I asked her what she meant. She said, just as factually as a 4-year-old could possibly be, that she used to train dogs and wolves before she died. She herself looked confused for a bit, as though this thought was surprising to her as well. I didn't know what to say, so I said, "Well, that's interesting." She enjoyed the rest of the show and never spoke of it again. Edit. Thank you for the award, internet stranger. I'll be sure to pay it forward when I'm able. When I was 3, I used to tell my mom stories about my other family every night before bed. The siblings I had, and the dog too. One day she took me to Target, and I told her I wanted big girl unders, and she said she would buy them for me, and I could wear them when I was potty trained. I told her that my other family already potty trained me, so I can start wearing them now. I put them on that day, and never had an accident after that. She never potty trained me, and was just shocked. My daughter is about to turn 4 and talks about being in belly a lot. She recalls details and things I did while pregnant that I know I haven't told her or talked about. She talks about the day I rode the school bus to the mini town. I took my students on a field trip when I was nearly 9 months pregnant to a mini city play place. She tells me it was dark, but she heard my heart and heard my voice. When my son was about 3, he told us how he remembered being a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. This was in 1998. When my daughter was 3, she hugged me while she was falling asleep and said, "I'm her favorite mama. Huh, I love you even more than my other mama." Me, "Your other mama? Huh, yeah. She died." Me, "Oh. Huh, she got eaten by rats." Me, now wide awake, "Oh. Huh, but it's okay, because I cut them open and got her out." Me, "Wow. Was she okay?" Huh, "Oh no. She still died." Sweet dreams, though. Be sure to like and subscribe for more reading Reddit videos. Thanks, bye.